So now that you have assessed your English, so you know where you are and where you are going, and you've established a routine, now it's time for steps 3 and 4.
And now it's time for the hard part. What's up, guys, and welcome back to Rival Friends English. If you have just jumped right into this video series, this is actually part 2 out of 3 that we're going to work on this step-by-step guide in order for you to get to English fluency, actually breaking it down. We're going to break down steps 3 and 4 today, but just a little bit of reverse. Step 1 and 2, we are trying to figure out where we are. That's an assessment and evaluation, but we're also trying to figure out what are some realistic things that we can do, some routines, some practices, some repetitions, because we need to be able to measure how well we're going to be able to keep up this schedule before we can actually start adding stuff on. We don't want to waste the time. We need to do the prep work like an architect that plans the house. Before you build the house, you got to make that plan. But now it's time to start building that house.
Wow. Kind of. In step 3, you're actually going to be strengthening your foundation. And what this means is now that you've identified what's broken in your English, it's time to go back and address those things. Now, this could be anything from you just don't do subject-verb agreement very well, meaning you don't do he says or they say. Maybe you just don't do the S properly on the end. Maybe it's how you don't know how to use articles correctly or even halfway correctly. Or maybe you just don't have very much vocabulary. Some people, they just never put the work into reading and writing, so they only speak and listen. Or maybe there's just one skill that they've just really not paid any attention to. So maybe their reading and writing is actually really good, but their speaking and listening is actually quite poor. Whatever it is time to go back and invest in strengthening those so that when you get to more advanced material, stuff that's ahead of what you know, you would at least have a firm foundation to tie it to. Honestly, let's think about this realistically here. It's probably going to take longer to learn advanced grammar if you don't have a solid grasp of intermediate grammar, because you have nothing to tie it to, really. You can certainly build advanced habits or advanced speaking patterns, but you're not really going to understand why or be able to manipulate them like a fluent speaker can until you understand why they work or how they work.
We have to strengthen that foundation. We bring a lot of the beginner and intermediate issues into us while we're still trying to grow. And if we're kind of making this like hodgepodge of like intermediate mistakes and advanced mistakes, it can be extremely difficult to navigate as you're trying to build on with this complex grammar. We'll get to the house in a bit, but like every builder knows, you got to have a good solid foundation first. But something that a lot of English teachers don't actually want to say is that these little mistakes, they're probably not breaking your English completely. People are still able to understand you well enough. The question, though, is how easily can they understand you? It's not like, oh, you said the wrong subject-verb agreement and everything, the rest of every content of what you said just explodes. It's not like that.
No.
It's all of these things kind of add up to a point where native speakers have trouble listening and understanding exactly what you're trying to say.
So if you are somebody in a position at work where you need to be able to lead trainings, it is very important that people understand you and they're not focusing on trying to understand you, but they can understand the content you are sharing with them. If you are trying to become a teacher in the United States, whether for children or adults, it is probably important to be able to learn English and be able to speak it well. If you wish to own businesses or be an investor here, you don't absolutely need fluency in English in order to do this well. But if you yourself wish to prioritize being able to speak clearly and effectively and efficiently in English, fluency might be an appropriate goal to go for here. Starting on that journey means weeding out the mistakes that you're making that are really simple to fix. And in the grand scheme of things, they're fairly simple to fix. Taking the time to go back and fix those things, address them, and then you can build on your house with more advanced grammar.
So you can do this in several ways. So for example, you can take a grammar course that's specifically designed to kind of catch you up to speed with all of the previous intermediate to low advanced grammar points that you were still kind of struggling with. You can take a grammar course for that.
You can also work with a tutor to fix those things. And this could be the same tutor that gave you an assessment beforehand in step 1. It could also be just another tutor that actually has a background with your language or for speakers of your first language. In which case, a tutor is a great way to fast track you into learning some things because they already know what you probably already struggle with, especially if they have experience from your first language.
Another thing is invest time into shadowing audio clips and reading materials and things that you're listening and consuming. Actually be able to produce that on a regular basis so that you can kind of catch these as you go. Some of the really good natural speakers of English that are very close to fluent, this is one of their main practices. They listen and read great English material.
You have to have quality input in order to have quality output. That's the key, but the next step to making that key most effective is you spend the time to go back and reevaluate. We talked about this a lot in the first video in this series, but I just want to reiterate that here. You've got to go back and listen to a recording of you shadowing something. You've got to go back and read over what you just wrote. You have to. If you don't have that step, then you are slashing the effectiveness of your practice, of your study.
Another thing you could do is take group classes. So when you're in a group setting, especially with other ESL speakers, then you can learn from each other. Maybe somebody else has a problem that you don't have, and maybe you realize that you have a problem that you didn't realize before. Those differences can actually accentuate one another and actually be able to help each other and show the mistakes that you need to correct along the way.
Another thing you could do is ask an English-speaking friend to meet with you regularly and actually converse with you and correct you. I don't recommend that they interrupt you mid-sentence to do this, or even within the conversation, because it ruins the flow of the conversation, so you can lose your train of thought. It makes it less natural if you're doing that. But if it's somebody you're just talking with a friend, having coffee, and they're writing some things down, and then they talk about it with you afterward, that's amazing. That's what a tutor would do. So it's something that if somebody's willing to do that for you, that would be magnificent.
Or you can join a membership program where it's all of these together, where you have that social reinforcement, you have people that are learning around you, you have a tutor that is able to listen to, you have grammar courses that are able to kind of correct those things. All of these things kind of add up to basically just be like a highly functioning way that you can learn English. And we actually have this, we call it Fluency Fast Track, so we can fast track your English to fluency. That is the goal, and we're going to talk about this more at the end. If you want to check that out right now, you can actually check the link in the description below.
So after you feel confident that you have adequately corrected some of these habits, some of these glaring things that are a big difference and have been the biggest points of difficulty for native English speakers to understand you, after you feel pretty confident you've handled those, you need to check that. Go back to the tutor who evaluated you or the teacher who evaluated you, or take the IELTS or the TOEFL test again, whatever it is that you used to evaluate your English before. Go ahead and do it again. And then evaluate yourself and see what the results are. Compare them to the first ones. If you hired a tutor for this, ask the tutor if they can see some marks of difference, if they can compare notes, their own personal notes on how you were doing. See how well you've really progressed. If you've really handled a lot of these mistakes and these habits in English, if you corrected some of those, then it's time to move forward finally.
So step 4, after you have solidified your foundation, after you strengthen your foundation, now it is time to build on that foundation. Now it is the time where you kind of get into that advanced grammar, probably the thing you've been chopping at the bit to get to. Now it's that time.
Now it's the time. So this is like the subjunctive mood and conditionals and mixed conditionals, and you've got lots of nuanced pronunciation. You're going to have more to do with cadence and flow and a little bit with debate and persuasion and different contexts that you haven't been working with very much before. Now you're going to start wielding a lot more of these. And this isn't just built on grammar, okay? This is also paralanguage. You should be becoming more able to handle spontaneous conversations. You need to be really practicing with that. You need to be really going into debate and deep discussion over natural material or American movies or something. You need to be going deeper with all of that. And this is where you're just going to get into a lot of cultural, paralanguage, linguistic things, lots of grammar things, and it's all going to start coming together. You should also be working with integrated skills. So you need to be working on activities that make you exercise different skills simultaneously or near simultaneously. So you'll be using a lot of reading and writing and speaking and listening all in the same activities and the same tasks.
You can also check out tricky punctuation or advanced vocabulary or idioms to help kind of fill out that bank that you can use then in your own speech.
Yeah, to express yourself more. Like, that's the goal here. One of the chief things that an advanced speaker is going to aim for in Fluency is that they can express themselves in multiple ways in different contexts.
Yeah.
You start practicing that here. Now, at this stage, you're going to be focusing on a lot of skills and words and gaining all of this still. But in steps 5 and 6, that's when you're really going to get in deep into doing a lot more expansion and deepening. But you're going to start some of those habits here in this step.
So at this point, you're probably thinking, how do I do this? How do I
Yes.
How do I learn the subjunctive mood? How do I practice the tricky punctuation? You do this by structuring some basic essays, doing some reports and summaries, doing things that are not just basic book reviews. Like, it's not just taking a book and just being like, oh yeah, I read the book. Here's what the book said. But it's actually taking that, digesting it, and then combining it with something else. These are extremely complex things to do with writing so that you can then practice how you would naturally produce this. So this is kind of taking elements, this is taking pieces and putting them together of your own mind. That's what building on that foundation looks like.
Another activity that you can do to help you build this is giving a very detailed account of things that happened in the past, things that happen over a process or progress or a period of time in the past, things that if this hadn't have happened, then this wouldn't have happened, right? Things like this where you're starting to get into some very complex things to express, but they're natural for us to express in English. If we're talking about, well, if this had happened, then this wouldn't have happened, or if I had invested here, then now I would have had this much money, or something like that. The topics themselves are not that difficult. It's the way that we're talking about them and the flexibility and the planes in which we're talking about these things. We're talking about what could have happened. We're talking about possibilities, contingent upon something else happening in the past or in the future even. Again, this is advanced, right? This is a way that you can practice this and exercise that.
Another thing you can kind of focus is on reading comprehension strategies and spoken response strategies. Likely, you will have to write something. You will have to speak about something. Producing language is a lot harder than just recognizing it, than just inputting it and comprehending it. That's difficult, but it's also more difficult to be able to start to craft a very good written response, a very good spoken response as a response to something that just happened. It's listening to that podcast and writing a really good evaluation of it. It's reading through multiple reports and combining them together to be able to say, this is what we should do.
Again, you're hearing it with us saying this over and over again. You're going to be expanding your skill set. You're also going to be expanding your grammar and your vocabulary base and your idiom base, the patterns that you use. There's this big focus here, and you can start to hear us say this too. In step 3, you were really focusing on the small little things, correcting these little things. In step 4, in this advanced level, you're focusing on this big picture view and this zoomed in view. You're going back and forth regularly. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to tweak this. This is how I say this in this specific situation. Okay, how can I come out and put that in a larger structure? How can I use that in a larger context? This skill to be able to go in and out, this is actually a great work skill as well, and a time management skill as well. Like, this is a great skill to have in many different things. But in language, this is where we see a lot of people really struggle, and they really end up having to find a teacher or a tutor, because having somebody keep them accountable to make sure they're going back and forth enough, zooming in, working on something small, then zooming out and plugging it into the broader communication abilities in English. This is very difficult and very tricky. So if you find in this step that you need to hire a tutor, it's actually really not a bad idea. It's a good idea to do this. Again, be careful who you are choosing. Make sure you ask them specifically what their experience is and what they excel in as a tutor, what do they excel in teaching, and what do they enjoy doing in language already. By doing that, hopefully you can avoid some bad tutors and stick with a really good tutor.
All right, guys, so that's step 3 and 4. It's strengthening that foundation and starting to build upon that foundation. We still don't have a house yet, okay, but we have a foundation, we have some walls, we have some structure to it, and that's really, really good. It's a good start. It will feel slow. I will say this right now. Step 3 and 4 are going to feel like the slowest steps, because there's going to be so much correcting. There's going to be so much tweaking and building and hammering and nailing and putting up and putting down.
It feels endless.
It's necessary. And we as English teachers can say with 100% authority, because we have notes to back it up, that as you work on this, you will indeed make fewer mistakes. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like you just start opening up cans of worms and they just start multiplying everywhere. But absolutely, as you work on this with a tutor in a community, you will find yourself being able to express yourself more clearly, more fluently, more comfortably. And if you have a very good tutor, they definitely will be able to tell the difference between before step 3 and 4 and after step 3 and 4.
All right, guys, that's it for us today. Keep an eye out for our next video where we will finish up this series and we'll find out what you do in steps 5 and 6. If this is where you learn advanced stuff, advanced things, integrating and building structured essays and things of this nature, what do you do for steps 5 and 6? We'll tell you in the next video.
Catch you on the next one.
Bye.